Why the Federal Government is to Blame for the COVID-19 Resurgence by John T. Harvey. Signs are now emerging that partial reopenings across the nation may have triggered the COVID-19 resurgence we all feared. It is already affecting the U.S. stock market, U.S. oil prices, and other world markets, and there are fears that the mass protests could further contribute to the spread. We may be entering into a difficult time. Most of the blame so far has been pinned on state and local governments. They shouldn't have opened so soon. They shouldn't have given in to the pressure from businesses and citizens. They should be more effectively enforcing the rules that remain in place, etc. I don't see it that way at all. Yes, the rhetoric of some governors and mayors has been counterproductive, but the bottom line is, even barring that, what choice did they have? The shutdown has had a devastating effect on millions of citizens, and state and local government budgets are going to be severely impacted by the decline in tax revenue and increased need for social services. This is without question the single most significant blow to the economy since the Depression, and we have a right to expect our elected officials to act. Now put yourself in the shoes of the governor of a state, where unemployment and business failures are climbing and your budget is strained to breaking. Washington has already signaled that that is perfectly fine with them if you go bankrupt, and that not a single dollar more will go to help the unemployed. It's therefore up to you to do something to relieve the pressure. But what? Hire the unemployed to work in the governor's mansion? Not when state revenues are collapsing and you're already furloughing staff. Tell businesses they have to give away all their products for free? Not only is that probably not legally enforceable, but those owners and their employees have to eat too. Cure COVID-19? That'd be great. Get right on that. Reopen the economy. Aha! Here's one you can actually do. It may make the problem worse in the long run, but then again, it may not. Meanwhile, in the short run, you are out of options and the situation is deteriorating rapidly. You're backed into a corner and your citizens desperately need help. If only there had been another way of supporting the economy without opening us up to increased chance of infection. There was, of course. It simply wasn't pursued. Our federal government should have attacked the problem early, often, and vigorously. As vigorously as in those nations where their unemployment rates are not challenging Great Depression levels. Had we intervened to directly support workers' and entrepreneurs' incomes on a scale that ensured little to no decline, then business owners and households would not have been chafing at the bit to get back into the marketplace, and within 6 feet of one another. Some nations, for example, saw the federal government replacing workers' incomes so that firms with lagging sales did not have to undertake layoffs, a particular problem in the U.S. when it means you no longer have health insurance in the middle of a global pandemic. Other nations have also been more aggressive in granting support to business. Not surprisingly, forecast unemployment rates in the EU and the UK are expected to be 3/4 and perhaps even half of ours. Imagine how this would have helped in a U.S. context. It would have relieved states of a tremendous burden and made sure that they could have continued to earn tax revenue from commercial activity. Furthermore, it would ensure that if and when we do emerge from this dystopia, people and businesses won't have months of unpaid rent, house payments, credit card bills, etc. on their backs. I'm a critic of Federal Reserve policy on many fronts, but Fed Chair Jerome Powell is dead on when he predicts a long road to recovery. This is not to say that any country has done everything exactly right. Of course not, and significant improvements could be made. For example, had the US had a job guarantee already in place, a system whereby the federal government agrees to hire anyone who cannot find work in the private sector, then not only could incomes have been supported and without requiring new legislation, but we could have directed workers into areas where we most needed increased production. That's precisely what we did in World War II, in a country still recovering from the Depression. People were employed in the armed services, weapons and ammunition factories, supporting industries, etc. Unemployment fell below 2%. But how will we pay for it? The way we always do. The federal government spends money into existence. Who seriously believes that we borrowed the $3 trillion for the CARES Act? From whom? China, in the midst of the worst economic turndown in almost 50 years? Europe, where they hold 4 of the top 5 spots in COVID-19 mortality rates? American citizens, who would effectively be loaning the government money so that the government could give it right back to them? Fortunately, it turns out that we don't need to borrow those little green pieces of paper or their electronic equivalent from anyone, because we make them right here in America. For that reason, the U.S. cannot possibly be forced to default in the currency it issues. So paying for it is not an issue, not in dollar terms. It's resources that limit us. Speaking of which, won't this cause inflation? Maybe. World War II certainly did in some ways. It offers a parallel example. We both boosted incomes and lowered the quantity of consumer goods, just as we are now. Of course, at that time the latter was the result of shifting production toward the war effort. Today, it's because the global pandemic and its consequences have led to a decline in production in many areas. We've already seen a big jump in food prices, and only low energy costs and diminished demand elsewhere have kept average consumer price inflation low. But A, that's the fault of COVID-19, not government policy. B, allowing people's incomes to fall so low that they can't afford food and prices fall is hardly a reasonable solution. And C, prices are signals to entrepreneurs. If the price of X is rising, then entrepreneurs will make more of X, which is what consumers want. The conditions imposed on us by the global pandemic will obviously make it more difficult to respond, but the signal to do so is entirely appropriate. Long story short, I don't blame America's governors, mayors, entrepreneurs, or households for the reopenings that appear to have contributed to a resurgence in COVID-19. I blame the people who gave them no choice. I blame Washington.